step. Kim McCoy is a practicing barrister in both Hong Kong and New Zealand and is the founder of the Hong Kong Animal Law and Protection Organization. HKLAPO brings together lawyers, law students, and other professional members of the community who have a shared passion for animals to work together to improve the welfare and lives of animals. He's also a member of the New Zealand Animal Law Association. We're incredibly happy to have you on the show to talk about the legal landscape of animals in Hong Kong and also the world. So I guess my first question really is just, what laws currently exist in Hong Kong for animals? I've heard about the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals ordinance, but I was curious as to know what exactly it entails.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity to speak about animals. It's a real passion of mine. So any opportunity I get to express my love and my expertise, I love it. So thank you so much. So in terms of Hong Kong, one of the good things we have is we have a wide number of animal laws. So our legislation we call ordinances. So in the UK, they may call acts. We call them ordinances here. So as you said, Karthik, we've got the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Ordinance, which is the primary piece of legislation in Hong Kong, which prevents, as you can imagine, cruelty to animals. But we've got other ones like the Wild Animals Protection Ordinance, Cats and Dogs Ordinance. We've got Endangered Species of Plants and Animals Ordinance, and others. So Hong Kong's very fortunate to have a lot of laws in place, but because there are laws, it doesn't mean that animals are properly protected.
Yeah, and what are some of the shortcomings of the law? Does it not include farmed animals? Are the penalties not high enough? Is it that it's too old and outdated?
All of the above. I mean, I could spend hours on this topic. So the main issue is we live in a very backwards sort of legislation. So our Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Ordinance is over 90 years old, and it's changed once. So in the 90 years, it's only changed once, and that's only an increase in the penalties. So we're still using words that are used in Victorian English times, very outdated. It's not in keeping with the modern understanding of animal law and animal welfare science that we know due to experiments and research. So it's very outdated, and it's also very reactive. So in terms of how the law works in Hong Kong, an animal has to be abused before the law can step in. And that's not what we want. I mean, of course, it's good to punish those who commit acts of cruelty against animals, but we want to make sure that the animals are protected before that happens. So in places like the UK, New Zealand, Australia, we see this concept of duty of care. So as a person who's responsible for an animal, I have a duty towards that. And I have to make sure that the welfare of that animal is kept. We don't have that in Hong Kong. So animals have to be abused before the law steps in. So that's one of the biggest hurdles that we face. The other hurdles just include enforcement, really low penalties, not enough prosecutions for animal-related cases. Yeah, the list goes on, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you mentioned duty of care laws. So how does it exactly work? So let's say that I fail my duty of care to an animal that I'm keeping. Doesn't the law also step in only after I failed that? So like, what's the difference between this and laws that are against like cruelty?
So, I mean, the duty of care just makes you aware of your responsibility beforehand. I mean, you're very right. Like, if you fail in your duty of care, of course, then it's still reactive. But we want people to be thinking about the welfare of animals prior to anything happening. So, I mean, that's the sort of mindset that we want. We want people to go, I'm responsible for this animal. I owe the duties to, give it fresh water, food, walk it, not to leave it outside in 35-degree heat, to ensure that animals are protected that way, rather than, okay, I know I'm not supposed to, kick or beat or torture a dog. That sort of mindset.
Yeah, and I think another benefit of duty of care laws is that they're probably also likely to be more expansive than laws that only look at cruelty, and that some of the I think some of the statutes on cruelty are very like specific. They're like torture, abuse, and animals can still suffer, even though they're not being tortured, but they can still suffer a lot of consequences, and that's why it's a good thing that we have duty of care laws, if that's what we're trying to push for. Um,
Yeah,
Another question, yeah. Um,
sorry, I was just going to say, I mean, one of the things that we've learned these days is, animals are really sentient. So they have the capacity to feel pain, pleasure, fear, just like you and I do. So, I mean, if we're going to protect them in terms of physical harm, we also need to be thinking about their emotional well-being and their welfare as well. So I think that also comes into play.
yeah, absolutely. Um, you also, I think you did your undergrad in New Zealand. Did you like grow
Yeah.
up there as well?
Yeah. So my background is I'm half Chinese, Hong Kong Chinese, half Kiwi. So my dad is a Kiwi. I was born in Hong Kong and I grew up in New Zealand. And then I just spent, my childhood and education through New Zealand and came back to Hong Kong eventually. Yeah.
Yeah, that explains the accent. So my question's about New Zealand, which is, why do you think there are better animal protection laws there and other countries compared to Hong Kong? The government in Hong Kong might not see it as a priority to pass a lot of new laws about animals, but isn't that also the case in other countries where their domestic populations probably care about something else? Is there something unique about Hong Kong, maybe like a cultural aspect that you've noticed that makes it different?
Yeah, I mean, New Zealand's special because I mean, the one thing when as soon as you say New Zealand, people go, oh, the land of a million sheep. So agriculture is a really big part of New Zealand. We also have the benefit of space. So people don't live in small apartments like we do here in Hong Kong. They have houses with backyards, so they're more likely to get a companion animal in their home. I think they're only behind the USA in terms of percentage of households with a companion animal. I think they're about 64%, whereas Hong Kong is 10%. So there's a massive, difference in the number of people who have sort of relationships with animals. So I think in terms of that, it just gives people a better understanding of what animals actually are. The more you approach and the more you're able to spend time with them, the more you understand them, and the more you realize, wow, this is a living creature that deserves our protection. So I think in that way, that's why New Zealanders and other countries are so far ahead of Hong Kong, because it's just so different here. Also, as I said, agriculture is a big thing. So when it's something that's going to be the backbone of the economy for the country, then there are specific laws in place to make sure that things are properly maintained and the welfare is kept. So New Zealand keeps that reputation of being one of the pioneers of leading animal welfare countries. We don't have that in Hong Kong again. So I think to answer your question very simply, it's just a mindset thing. In New Zealand, people appreciate and understand animals for what they are. Whereas in Hong Kong, I think they're still considered um, either by the citizens of Hong Kong itself or the law that animals are just property. So when an animal is injured or harm is done to the animal, it's very easy just to replace that because it's not so much it's a living being, it's just property. So if it costs me $10,000 to fix my dog, I will pay you $10,000 and then that's it. But it doesn't quite fix it. You know what I mean? So I think it's the mentality. They're just animals, which is what needs to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that at least with regards to the people who I've spoken on for this blog, a lot of them have said that the reason they care so much about animal welfare is because they've grown up around animals their entire lives. And I think that a lot of those things are really important in shaping how people think of animals. And Hong Kong being a city that's full of skyscrapers, I think people might not be as exposed to animals as you pointed out. Um, do you think that because Hong Kong doesn't have as much farming happening or doesn't have as many pets, that when we're talking about the scale of the problem of animal welfare, it's lower than other countries because there are fewer animals that like could be harmed compared to like maybe New Zealand where there are like millions of cows and pigs and chickens.
Yeah, I think the scale is the same, but the focus is very different. So, like you said, the farming aspect in Hong Kong is not as great, but we have a really bad issue with illegal wildlife trade. So we're getting Hong Kong, where it is geographically, is the perfect sort of center point for trade. So we're getting a lot of illegal wildlife coming through Hong Kong. The lack of understanding about why we need to protect, companion animals and just, animals in general means that there are lots of cruelty cases. We see other forms of abuse in relation to animals. So I think the scope is the same. It's just it's focused in different areas.
Yeah, and here's a statistic on this that I read up on, and it was really scary, which was that the World Wildlife Fund reported that more than 767 million Hong Kong dollars worth of trafficked wildlife was seized in Hong Kong between 2013 and 2019. And that's a huge number. Are there any other unique problems that Hong Kong faces as it concerns animal welfare?
Um, I mean, the main problem is just the lack of enforcement of the laws. Like I started off with, just because you have laws in place, it doesn't mean people and animals are being protected. So it's just an understanding of how the law works and what actually needs to be done to make sure the law is effective. I think there's still a big hesitation and maybe just fear of doing something new. So we've got all of these wonderful laws that are meant to do something, but if you don't utilize them properly, it doesn't serve its purpose. I don't know why there's hesitation. Again, it may be just because animal welfare and anything related to animals is not considered too important. So maybe that's why there's a hesitation to use this. But I mean, Hong Kong is one of those places where, when you think about it, it's sort of is very futuristic. Like you said, it's a cityscape, it's apartment buildings. We pride ourselves in being, one of the front runners in the world. But when you look at its animal welfare legislation and how it treats animals, we are towards the bottom. And that disparity does not make sense. So something is wrong, and something needs to change.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with the fact that even though we might have a lot of laws for animals, if we're unable to enforce them, then the problem still remains. And that's especially the case in India, where it is written in the constitution that one ought be compassionate towards animals, yet there is just no enforcement. A lot of slaughterhouses are not registered. There is a lot of trafficking of animals, across the border, and it's really sad because the law's there, and it just needs to be applied, but then it doesn't happen because, again, it's not just the law, but about whether people actually want to enforce it. But do you think that maybe in Hong Kong, because it might have a greater state capacity than India, that if we're able to, convince the minds of those at the top, we would be able to enforce some of these laws? Because in India, I think it's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, I mean that's why I started this organization, because when I came back from New Zealand to Hong Kong and I started looking at some of these issues, I thought, what is going on here? Like, for such a modern and futuristic city, why are the laws so outdated and why are they not effective? I mean, so yeah, I mean, the more noise we can make about something, the greater the chance that things will change. And yeah, I hope that the Legislative Council, which is, the lawmakers here in Hong Kong, will consider the fact that we have so many of these issues repeatedly coming up through the news, through, talks like yours, through blogs. Like, there's a systemic issue that needs to be fixed. Why don't you fix it? So yeah, I'm a huge advocate for advocating for animals, and so what you do in your podcast is really incredible. So you are one of the reasons, if Hong Kong changes, it falls with you, because you are willing to speak out about these issues. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important that we do talk about these issues. We make it such that there are a significant number of people who care about them. And I think that that might be a good thing to kind of, it's hard to make animal welfare the priority for a lot of people, but it's an issue that I think governments can still care about while them not needing to trade off other things,
Yeah.
at least when it comes to enforcing laws that have to do with cruelty. I was also really interested in just the field of animal law more generally, and globally. How do you think it will change over time? So maybe this is the decade of trying to get anti-cruelty laws, but maybe, in future years we'll see like laws that have to do with alternative meat, or food ethics. So how do you see this field changing?
Yeah, I mean, what laws should do is be, backed by animal welfare science. So these are the experts in their field. They tell us what animals are doing and how we should treat them and things like that. So the way the law should move forward is on the backing of science. So I mean, we've seen the sentience of animals being recognized in, a lot of different species. That's moving forward. That allows us to already change the landscape in which we protect animals. But yeah, I can see a really bright future in terms of animal welfare, and more people are beginning to realize that this is an area that is needs assistance, and B, is frankly really important to not only, the animals themselves, but for humans, because I mean, we always talk about One Health. The health of the world is the health of the people, is the health of the animals. So if we neglect one area in that way, the rest of us fall as well. So if we're to improve in terms of how we are to protect ourselves and the planet, then animals also fall into that. So hopefully the law will recognize that as a critical pillar to move forward. But yeah, it's a bright area. We just need more people to do more and think about more of these issues.
Yeah, and I also read that you do work with a global animal law. Is there like a framework that you envision seeing, or do you think that we might be able to get global change if, let's say, countries that export a lot of meat, for example, have stringent laws in their countries that get like transplanted to like other countries when they're exporting animals to them?
Yeah, I mean, the best case scenario is everyone abides by the same set of rules, and those rules are backed by science and education. So if we know that this is how we are to treat, exporting animals, then I hope everyone does the same, because if there's one country that's doing A and one country that's doing B, that's where problems exist. So yeah, I hope one day that there will be some sort of overarching animal welfare manual where, different countries and the powers that be can draw from that to go, okay, how does that compare with India, UK, Australia, France, and just compare and contrast and make sure that everyone is on that same level playing field. Because I think when someone is up here and someone is down here, it creates a lot of issues, and that's what we don't want.
Yeah, and to come back to Hong Kong, I was also reading on the on wild boars and how that's become a problem, and how the government's kind of dealing with that issue, which is that they are shooting them to death as opposed to using other ways. Is it hard to get sympathy for animals like that? I've also read about like sharks in Hong Kong and other like aquatic animals. Like they seem harder for people to empathize with than, let's say, dogs and cats.
Yeah, you're completely right. I think when we think about animals, the first thing that comes to our mind is the cute and cuddly ones. Our puppies, our kittens, our rabbits, maybe our hamsters that live in our flats. But a lot of people also forget wild boars, sharks, and things like that. They're also classified as animals. So if we are to be fair, and if we are to apply the law fairly, then all animals deserve the same protection. Okay, we can't say because it's a rat, it deserves less protection than a cat. Okay, but yeah, there is a sense of hesitation to recognize that in terms of the wild animals. So that's, I mean, the wild boar situation was really sad. The government just went back on its original plan to lure them out and then shoot them. And for me, it made no sense, because that killing them should be the last resort. You don't take an animal's life without trying everything else. But they didn't do that. So that's the issue that I had with the boars. I mean, the reasons we were seeing boars come into urban areas was because they were looking for food. And the rubbish bins that we have in Hong Kong, they're not properly secured. So the boars would come along, they'd tip the bin over, and then eat the rubbish. So why not change the style of the rubbish bin so that A, the boars can't open it, and B, it doesn't tip over. So even in my apartment here in Hong Kong, we see boars every single night, every night. And there's a rubbish bin right outside our place. And so every night the boars are coming in, they're doing what they do. Very recently, they've changed the rubbish bin. And I think I've seen one in the past 3 weeks. So that's a deterrent already. So why is it that that wasn't properly imposed before the cull? And I mean, the answer, I think, is it's cost. It's more expensive to fit these new rubbish bins, to make these new rubbish bins, than to just shoot these animals, which should never be the issue.
Yeah, and I think that one of the biggest problems with this is also just they're not solving the root cause of the problem, and they're just shooting the wild boars as they come along, and that's never gonna, end the issue. And I also did an interview with someone who was working on humane rodenticides, which was very interesting because it was essentially birth control for rodents as a way to kind of decrease their populations, and that's a much better thing to do than rodenticides that cause like painful deaths. But it's just the ease that people see when it comes to like killing them quickly, or just the fact that they don't want to change sanitation and other things that are more difficult. One of the things I think that could be done is just framing the proposals in a more anthropocentric way, which is, this is something that can help humans if we change the way that rubbish is handled, or this is something that will lead to less animals needing to be killed, which is also something I don't think people are like happy about, but think they might have to do. So yeah, I just really hope that those things change, because rodents and like wild boars, pests are pretty important, because we don't think of them as like at least in the field of animal welfare, it's often farmed animals, it's often wild animals, but these are animals that do suffer, and we can very easily prevent it compared to like any of the other areas of animal welfare. I wanted to talk a little bit about your own work in animal law. So do you mind talking about a few cases that you've tried?
Yeah, so I mean, animal law is just so untouched here in Hong Kong, and it's one of the things I want to do as part of this organization, is just to bring more cases to court so that people are aware that they are also these animals are being protected and advocated for. I mean, some of the cases I do, they're they're disappointing because I think people still don't understand the value of animals, and why it's so important that we advocate for them. One of the most memorable cases, for the wrong reason, is it's in relation to a case I did a couple of years ago. So there was an apartment in Hong Kong, and 30 animals had been thrown out of the apartment from the 5th floor. So it was cats, rabbits, chinchillas, hamsters, and other animals. Okay, about 18 of them died, and 12 of them survived, but very injured. So they were rescued and taken to the SPCA to be looked after. But no one was prosecuted for animal cruelty, which is just bizarre. So one of the people who rescued the cats that survived said, well, I don't want to just leave it like this. I want to do something about this because it feels wrong. So we challenged the decision to not prosecute someone, because we thought the evidence is there, it's strong enough. Why did nothing happen? And we unfortunately lost. But, you know, it's not so much winning. I mean, if we won, it would have been great. But it's not so much winning and losing, but raising awareness about some of these things. I mean, as a barrister myself, my trade is in the court. I advocate for my clients, be it, you know, underprivileged people, animals, whatever. That's my trade. So if I can do that with the mindset that I can do something for animals, then I'm going to keep doing that. But there's lots of work that can be done in Hong Kong. A lot of the times it just doesn't get to the court stage because people just either decide, oh, it's not important enough to keep going, or it's too hard, or it's taking too long, which is a shame, because if we can get more cases to court, it will also allow the judges and the prosecutors to understand, oh, this is a big issue. We need to take more, pay more attention to it.
Yeah, I have two questions on this. The first is there prosecutorial discretion in Hong Kong? So do prosecutors, are they the only ones who are allowed to like prosecute cases, or can like people bring like FIRs and complaints?
So in Hong Kong, yeah, the prosecution generally bring cases, but you can take, members of the public can do a private prosecution, but the power goes back to the Department of Justice to take over that. So if I start a case against, person A, and I start it, the Department of Justice may say, okay, Kim, set up aside, we've got this now. Okay, so I think that tool isn't utilized enough in Hong Kong. I think people don't know that they can do this. And if the mindset of the Department of Justice and, other prosecution areas are that, well, I'm not going to do anything because it's just an animal, then yeah, we should do more ourselves.
Yeah, the second is less of a question, but more something that I was talking about with someone who's an animal lawyer in India. And one of the most challenging things about being an animal lawyer is just some of the cases that you have to try just involve gratuitous cruelty, and it's just hard to prosecute these cases. It's like hard to bring these cases to court or have to confront the abuse. And I think that the one thing that helps is just knowing that the animals are going through much worse and pushing through. Did you have any experiences of this becoming more challenging, more difficult as you were approaching more animal law cases?
Yeah, I think for me, it's always been my mindset that, my role is to present the evidence. If I do my job and the process is fair and right, the right result will happen. It may be a really egregious act of cruelty. It may be just the worst cases of, animal abuse that I've seen. But if I get swayed by that, or I find it too difficult, then the process for the animal is neglected. I'm not doing my job on their behalf. So, a lot of the times you just have to go, okay, you're a professional. This is your job. these cats and dogs and whatever, they're going through, like you said, a lot worse. The least I can do is make sure that I'm doing the best I can to ensure that the process is fair so that the right result is reached. I mean, that's all we can do. But yeah, it is really tough. And I think it can dissuade some people from looking at this area because the types of abuse are just so vast and just they can really be sort of eye-opening and jaw-dropping. So yeah, you've got to be prepared for that.
Yeah, and I think another thing to just kind of ask is when you bring these cases to court, how are the judges like? Do they have a bias against cases that have to do with animals? Because usually it is the case that they don't really think of it as something that they're probably uncomfortable ruling in favor of animals when they have these other preconceived notions of how they're going to rule before. If you like experienced that, or can you bring light to this?
Yeah, I think I want to believe that any judge that sits in a court will do what they think is right, okay? And that's usually on the basis of the evidence before them. They shouldn't be deciding or predetermining cases before hearing everything. So, but I do hope that that happens in Hong Kong. And I haven't seen instances where I can say that doesn't happen. So that's a positive. But I think the issue is the lack of understanding by judges about the harm animals go through. So, I mean, if you're going to put a cat in a washing machine, which is a case that we've had recently in Hong Kong, that's severe harm and trauma to that animal. So that needs to be appropriately punished. So I always sort of relate animal cases to other, groups of people that need help, like children. I mean, if you're putting a small child in a washing machine, what is that going to do to that child? Why is that any different to putting an animal in a washing machine? So the punishment should be equally severe. The problem is the law that we have in Hong Kong in terms of animal cruelty is not strong enough. So even if the judge says, this is a really, really terrible case, I really need to punish this defendant, the law only limits them to what they can do. So, I mean, if we are to really protect animals, the law needs to change to ensure that judges are given greater sentencing powers so that they can use the full, force of the law to ensure that people do not offend again, and those who commit acts are properly punished.
Yeah, and I think that at least with regards to animal cruelty, there's a correlation between those who are abused, those who are animal abusers, and as well as people who have cases of domestic abuse and violence. Because if someone is of the mentality to torture or cause undue harm to an animal, they're probably likely to do that to other people. And so maybe kind of showing that evidence to governments and talking to them might be helpful. How exactly does it work when you're bringing something to the government? Because is Hong Kong still like a democracy where people go to vote and politicians enact policies, or has it become more semi autocratic where you have to like talk to people and get change?
So in terms of what we do, in terms of anything animal related, we usually compile the information about what it is that we want to change, how it is we want to change, and then we lobby it to one of the members of the Legislative Council, and there are some members who are very sympathetic towards changes in animal welfare and animal law. So we would talk to them about it, and then either through a press conference or submissions or written letters, then we would try and take that forward. So yeah, it's just a process of just compiling information, getting it to the right people, and then having them promote it for you. just because they do have the audience in terms of the Legislative Council. But it happens all the time. I mean, and it should happen. We were in the Legislative Council maybe a month or two ago, talking about glue traps. I don't know, have you heard of glue traps? Yeah, so we still use that in Hong Kong because they're a cheap, effective way of killing rodents. But the harm they do is to not only the rodents, but any other animal that gets caught in it is just inhumane. But we still have them here. So yeah, we're trying to get that changed, trying to pass the law that would ban that completely. So yeah, I mean, things take time. Change doesn't happen overnight, but we just need to, persevere.
Yeah, so you said that things like this take time, and this might be a hard question, but what's your timeline for change in Hong Kong?
That's, if that might be the $1 million question. I don't have an answer for you because, I sometimes see glimmers of hope and I think, okay, things are going to happen for the positive, and then nothing happens. Or randomly things will be enacted without really any prior thought. So, I mean, I can't say, but I hope in the next 5 to 10 years we're going to be in a place where Hong Kong animal related legislation is going to be in a bit more of a mature place, because at the moment it's just not quite right, and we're falling behind in comparison to other countries. And if people don't see that as a problem, then I think Hong Kong has a problem.
Yeah, so this was a lot of stuff on animal law in Hong Kong and the world, and I wanted to ask a few more questions about you. So what got you started in animal welfare?
Because I love animals. I mean, I love my job. I have the best job in the world. Um, I really love going to court. I love speaking on behalf of people, and I love sort of just promoting their interests and protecting their interests in court. So I was thinking, what is a group that needs and deserves protection? Well, of course, animals, because as you know, they don't have a voice, but yet they're so poorly looked after here in Hong Kong that I thought, well, I can't just sit back and do nothing. I've got to do something. We've got this wonderful professor in Hong Kong, Professor Amanda Whitford, who has done years and years and years of animal related advocacy, research, and she is honestly a superstar in my eyes. And so I spoke to her and I said, look, what can I do to help? And she said, um, try and start an organization, get more people talking about these issues, get more people involved, bring more news articles out, bring more blog articles out. And so, yeah, from then it's just sort of impassioned me to do more, because the more I looked at it, the more I realized I could do, because there's just so much to do.
Yeah, and how do you manage work as a barrister and also work for animal welfare? I mean, it must be a lot.
Oh, yeah, I don't balance it well. That is the truth. When I started this organization, it was myself, and I was doing everything. Now I'm very lucky to have a lot of law students, a lot of professionals who are giving their time to do a lot more, because they have learned about the issues, and B, they want to give back because they see this as important as well. So I'm able to sort of give a bit of work to other people so I can concentrate on my own career, my family, and things like that. But I mean, yeah, I don't have enough time. And if I could do animal stuff full time, I would, but it's very difficult.
Yeah, and what advice would you have to someone who wants to do law and help animals in Hong Kong and Asia?
I mean, the best advice I could do is just to open your eyes. I mean, a lot of us, we don't understand the damage and the harm that's being caused to animals because we don't read about it. It's not as prevalent in the news. It's not as prevalent in, law school. I mean, if you really want to learn about it, there's so much that you can learn about it. And, our organization supports people doing more for animals. So, yeah, I mean, just being able to educate yourself, make informed decisions, and go, okay, I can make a difference to animals as well. Why don't I? Just do it. There's no, it's not going to harm you. It's only going to better someone else, i.e., other animals. So yeah, just do it.
Yeah, and do you have any thoughts on anything we haven't covered yet? Any questions you wish you were asked?
No, I mean the main thing in Hong Kong that I'm looking at now, just for your interests, is pet shops. So the pet shop trade in Hong Kong is completely chaotic. In terms of the breeding and the trading of animals, dogs, they're quite well covered in terms of who can do it, what can be done, and the rules and regulations. But we've seen a shift in Hong Kong in relation to cats. So a lot of the pet stores that were selling dogs are now selling cats because the cat trade is unregulated. There's no rules, there's no nothing. It's cowboy land out there. So we're seeing a lot of people who are now going to pet stores, buying pedigree cats because they look cute, or that's the breed they want, or the shape or size or color. And they're bringing them home and they're falling very ill or, dying because the welfare of these animals in these pet shops are so poor. And you may think, okay, why is that so? Well, a lot of the trade is coming from, an illegal source, either from mainland China or elsewhere from illegal breeders who don't care about the welfare of animals. They care about the money. So if I can breed a beautiful cat for $100, and I can smuggle it into Hong Kong, sell it for $20,000, that's a good payday. So it goes back to what we were talking about at the very start. It's all about money and economy, which is a big problem here in Hong Kong. So I'm looking very closely at pet stores at the moment. I've had a lot of people talk to me recently and say, I've got this issue with a cat that I bought from a pet store. What can I do? So watch this space because we're going to really shake up the pet store trade in Hong Kong.
Absolutely. And I can't wait for that progress to happen and see change for animals in Hong Kong. I really liked today's talk. I definitely learned a lot about Hong Kong, about how unique it is in terms of the wild animal trafficking that happens and the law being archaic compared to a lot of other countries. And while these two things sound very grim, I think it's because there are people like you who care so much about animals, who dedicate their free time and their career to helping animals, that I think we are gonna have a much better world for them in the future. So thank you so much for all you do for animals. Your work is really inspiring, and it has been an honor and a joy having you on the show.
Thank you, Karthik. Thank you for your time, and thank you for what you're doing as well. It's people like you that give us hope that the next generation will continue fighting for animals.